Hey everyone, welcome to the second tutorial on my introduction to CI/CD pipelines. In this tutorial, we're going to actually run a process through the CI/CD pipeline to help build help push out actually an application, which is WordPress in this example, and we're going to use the CI/CD pipeline to help configure the VLANs IP policies on the Fortigate router. So let's begin. So in my first tutorial, I mentioned that teams are looking a way to automate tedious tasks, and one of those ways is to use a CI/CD pipeline. And by using a CI/CD pipeline, we also have the advantage of teams collaborating with each other. The network teams can collaborate with the dev teams, and they can collaborate with the ops teams. And this is all done through code, as we'll see in a few minutes. So for this example and for this project that I'm doing right now, I've made it available on my GitHub account, which you can go to and download and try it out on your own setup. Once you check out the project into your computer, you'll notice that there are 3 directories here. So the way I've set up this project to run is I have a project 1 folder that's called CICD, and in this folder we will launch the Ansible playbook to create 2 Git repositories on our CICD server. So the first repository is git-project1app, and the second one is git-project1network. And the reason I did this is I'm trying to filter out the network rules, and the configuration will go into this project file, and the WordPress will go into this file. So it's essentially splitting up the ops and the devs, and then running through the Jenkins pipeline will help merge everything together. Okay, so I'll actually go through the directories a little bit more for you to make it understandable. So the first one, project 1 net, we mostly want to run this to help configure the Fortigate the Fortigate router, and we'll take a look at the Jenkins file. So in the Jenkins file, we're basically going to create the Ansible environment, and I do this to help keep version control, so we have a consistent QA/QC throughout the environment. And you'll notice that when you run the Ansible playbook in our example, we need to supply a password for us to talk to the Fortigate router. And instead of putting the password into the Git repository, we're going to use Jenkins to store that password in a secret file, and then provide that secret password into the Ansible playbook by using this extra vars arguments and the password, and binding this password to this password. I know my naming convention is fine here, and then that will go here, and then that will help talk to the Fortigate router. This is similar. This is the exact same setup I've had in my previous example when I was just using the plain Ansible playbook. But in this example, what we want to do is put everything in Git, so that Git can register who has committed the code and have some rollback safety in case the security rules we put in don't work and we need to fall back. And now we'll take a quick look at the Project 1 app, which is just my simple Ansible WordPress playbook. And then we'll have the Jenkins file here. And again, we're going to build the environment to run the Ansible playbook. And then in this one, we're going to launch it against our dev server to spin up a Ansible WordPress dev instance. And then we're going to halt the process a bit, so there is a little bit of mock QA/QC going on. This step could be automated. And then we'll redeploy the same Ansible playbook into our production environment. Okay, and now first what we'll do is we'll go to our Project 1 CICD folder. So I'll just go down here. I'll actually remove this as well while I'm at it. So this is an old example. me see if I could make this a little bigger. Okay. So essentially, I've already performed making the keys. So we're going to use SSH Keys to have a passwordless interaction with our environment. You'll see this later on how this will play out. But essentially, I will activate it, and then I've already run this. I'll do it again just to ensure I've run this. So what I'm doing is I'm just installing the packages to verify they're actually there. Okay, and now I'm actually going to run the playbook. So now you can see that it's now creating those repos. It's copying this SSH key, public key, into the right folders. And now I'll log on to our CICD server so we can take a look what has happened. So as you'll notice that we now have get.project1 app right here and get.project1net right here. So this is where our Git repository will be now, and this is an SSH based repository. So the next part we're going to do is we're going to configure Jenkins now, and what we want to do is put the credentials to allow Jenkins to talk to our SSH repository and to pull out the code there to run it in the pipeline. So we'll go here, and the first thing we'll do is we'll create the credentials. So we'll go to Systems and here, and we're going to create a credential, and we're going to use the SSH username private key, and I'll call this get project1net. And for this key, we'll get this from our VS Code where I have, so in the project1 CICD, there's going to be a key files. When you follow the instructions, it'll show you at what step this comes out. But essentially what we want is to get this private key right here. And then we'll copy that into here. Okay. And then we'll repeat the same process for the other user. Sorry, should be app. For simplicity's sake, I'm reusing the same key, but you would want to use a different key to help split up the projects, so anybody who has access to project1 app doesn't have access to project1net. So we'll save this here. And then we'll add one more thing. So we'll add a secret text, and I will go back here. Go to the Jenkins file. So the reason we need the secret text is when I'm running the Ansible, when I actually commit the Ansible playbooks into our Git repository, I don't want to leave our passwords in the repository. So we're going to use Jenkins secrets mechanism to help secure our passwords a little bit. type that in again because I messed that up. Okay. So now we've set up our credentials in Jenkins. So what will happen is when this user, when Jenkins pipeline starts to run, it's going to use this user to run into our, to help check out our project one net folder from our Git repository. Okay. So now let's create a pipeline. We'll call this project one net and pipeline. Okay. And from here we want to click on trigger builds remotely. I'll try to see if I can increase the fonts a bit here. Here we go. Okay, and then for token authentication, we'll just keep it simple for now. Token 1, 2, 3. And this is the part where it's critical to set up properly. So this will allow us to pull the Jenkins file from the Git repository. You could also put your pipeline in this portion right here, but what we want to do is avoid interaction as much as possible with the Jenkins UI and try to get everything into the Git repository. So we'll do pipeline script from SCM, and we're going to select Git, and then we'll have the repository URL. And for us, the repository URL is going to be SSH, which is the protocol, get-project1net, which is our user, and this happens to be our CICD server, which is running get. So once it logs into there, it's going to go to this folder, and it's going to download the, or check out the code that's in there. And then we'll select net, and now that goes away. Okay, and we're happy with everything. We'll click save. I'll minus this a bit because we're missing some stuff. Okay. So right now the pipeline's ready to accept any calls from the HTTP request. So now we'll switch over to our CICD server, and we'll make sure we configure everything properly. Okay. So this is a regular normal bash script, and all we have is this one line, which is a curl command. So the -k is because we don't have the proper SSL certificate set up yet. And we'll eventually get to that later on as we mature in our data center. So right now I'll just put in our Jenkins user and our password. And then we'll put in our token. Normally you would try to hide a lot of this information as possible. Because this is a bash script, you can actually put the password in a vault, and you can use the curl command to actually call that vault to get the password and then substitute it here. But for now we'll just do like this to keep things simple. So we'll save this, and while we're at it, we'll also do it for the app project. And we'll set the token ID. Okay, now we've got our Git repos configured. We got the hooks configured. And all right, we'll go into our VS Code again. We'll go into our I'll remove this, get, and we'll literally just need to cut and paste this. So it's just a simple standard git command you run. So you initialize the repository, you add the remote, you add the files you want to commit, and you push it. So just copy and paste. Alright, so everything's looking good, didn't get an error there. We'll flip over to Jenkins now, and now we can see a build has now been placed in to the pipeline. And I'm actually going to go take a look at the build for a second. Console output. So when you're looking at the console output, you get a live view of what's actually going on the CICD server. So Jenkins is just running through, and it's going through the actual Jenkins file right here. So it's just executing these commands at the moment in the create environment. So let's switch over here. So we'll see that we're at the create environment stage. So this will take a while to build. Okay, let's go back. So now we're in the second stage of our Jenkins pipeline, which is execute playbook to create the VLAN and IP policies. So it's right here. So let's click here, console output, and you can see it's running right now. Okay, it looks like our build has been complete. Our Ansible playbook has ran successfully. We've got a finished success down here. Let's see what it looks like on the dashboard. Yep, so we have greens all the way across. So now what we'll do is we'll go to our Fortigate router, and now we'll just refresh the screen here and see if we have the new interfaces in. And now we have our VLAN 100 to 400, and now we'll check if we have our policies in. Alright, so everything's looking good. We have our IP4 policies, and we have our WAN 1 connection to VLAN 200. So this is what we're using to allow external access to our WordPress production server. All right. So that was one of the first pipelines we've ran now. So that helped us configure the network and security policies. So now we're going to move over and we're going to set up our environment so we can do the Jenkins pipeline deployment for our WordPress application. So we'll do the same steps as we did before. We're going to configure the Jenkins pipeline through the Jenkins web UI, and then we're going to set up the Git on the CICD server, and then we need to configure SSH access for Jenkins user to our dev server and our production server. All right, so let's go through the Jenkins UI again, and we'll create a new item. project one app, which is a pipeline. Okay. So we're going to trigger builds remotely. Put in our super secure token. We're going to do the pipeline script from SCM. We're going to use the get, and then okay, and then we're happy, so we'll save that. Okay, and now we'll hop onto our server here. So let me just verify this is correct. Yep. Okay, so that's correct. So get out of that. So this is the critical part. So whenever you submit do a git push to the Jenkins server, and you have the Jenkins pipeline running, it's executing under the user Jenkins. And in the Jenkins user, we've created we've used the SSH key gen to create our public-private key. And what we need to do now is copy that private key to our dev server and our production server. This will help us avoid any password authentication, which might require user intervention. So we'll just copy and paste this as well. And we'll repeat that again for our production server. Okay, now that's set. So now we'll repeat the process before with the get. So get init and all that, add. Now we'll go back to Jenkins and then we'll see what's going on. Alright, so now we can see that it's checked out the code, and now it's running the Jenkins file, which will say first to create the environment. So let's see, let's switch it to here. So it's the exact same procedure as before. It's going to, I'll just pull up the Jenkins file for this one. It's just going to create the environment, and then eventually it'll come down to this stage where it actually executes the Ansible playbook to create our WordPress instance on our dev server. So I'll scroll back up here. So this process in itself, when I usually run it, will take about 2 minutes. Alright, it looks like the build is done. We'll just take a quick check to see what the logs say. Scroll all the way to the bottom, and yep, it looks like it's completed okay. Alright, so we'll go up. So now we're at this user prompt deployment part, and if you mouse over, you'll notice that you can either proceed with the deployment or abort. So this is one of our first QA/QC check that we can do to see if the application looks okay. So we'll quickly go over and see how it looks. So yep, we see our instance of WordPress here, and it looks like it's okay. But let's say, for example, something didn't look right or there was something that was broken. We can always go back here and then we can abort the build. So we'll click abort. And now it'll terminate the rest of the pipeline. And you'll probably want to do this if you're doing a visual inspection, you notice something doesn't look right, and you can cancel it from going to production where your customers could interact with this and have a sour experience. So let's take a look at this example again, but let's say that everything was actually okay and we want to deploy it to production. There's actually a fast way to do this, and if we go here and click on build one, we can restart from any stage we want. So let's restart from the user prompt for deployment. And now you'll see the pipeline here is now starting up, and we'll fast track all the way to user prompt for deployment. So we'll click here and then we'll proceed. And now it's going to build the exact same environment that we have for dev, and we're going to build that into prod. And this is following a really nice project called 12-Factor App. If you check out the 12-Factor App, in one of the 12 factors they have here is something called the dev prod parity. And what the dev prod parity tries to ensure is that we try to keep our development, staging, and production as similar as possible. So we try to employ that in our pipeline that we're building here today. So the exact same code base that's used in dev will be the exact same code base used in prod. As you build future WordPress applications, you'll notice that most of the code base will remain the same, and you're only playing with themes and plugins at that point. As long as you don't play with the MySQL schema underlying, you should be okay playing with things in the themes and then pushing it into the dev environment to make sure it looks okay, and then eventually into the prod once you do your visual inspection to make sure everything's okay. Again, this process is identical to the dev process, so it should take an estimate 3 minutes for it to complete. So I'll pause the video again. I know there's a lot of pausing in this tutorial today, but it's the nature of how this stuff goes, and which is why you automate as much as possible, and you'll put in later versions of when we're working with the pipeline, you'll put alerts to send you an email, for example, when the pipeline is done, so you're not sitting looking at this GUI waiting for your pipeline to be done. So you could also go on to other works that way. Alright, so now it looks like it's done. We'll just quickly check the log to make sure there's nothing weird going on. Okay, so it looks like everything was okay, no errors. Okay, so it's perfect. Alright, so now what I'll do is I'll flip to my external interface to make sure that this application is now being able to be accessed from the external world. So I'll change my network a bit here. Okay. Alright, and now let's see if I can access this from the external IP address. Okay, and it looks like, yep, so we now have a production instance of WordPress. Naturally, you wouldn't want this page to be accessible publicly, but for our demonstration of how to get a Jenkins and a Git pipeline working together, we'll just go with this for now. So where are we now? Okay, so now we can just wrap up this tutorial for today. So what we did is we have actually 2 pipelines. The first pipeline was for provisioning security and the IP policies, VLANs on the Fortigate, and then we installed our application using our application WordPress on both the dev and the production server. As you can see, there's still a lot of rooms for automation and improvement in the CICD pipeline, but this is what it is all about. It's about getting a baseline pipeline built, and then as your organization matures, you can start adding more things to the CICD. You'll notice that there was a lot of SSH key manually copied from one server to another. We can deploy technology to help clean that up. So in the next tutorial, we're going to go over A/B testing, which is a very popular methodology used to help test a function in a production environment. And if that function doesn't work, you can slowly move those functions away and revert back to your original state. That involves load balancing that we'll try to work on using the Fortigate. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. My email is right here, and leave a comment below if you have any suggestions or feedback. All right, have a good one, everyone.